All right, I have with me today Colonel Tony Shaffer. We are going to be talking about the Russia-Ukraine war. We're going to talk a little bit about 9/11. We're going to talk a little bit about the whistleblowers on the Hunter Biden tax situation and also the UFO whistleblowers and some other fun topics that I'm going to surprise you with. But Colonel Shaffer, thank you so much for coming on today's show.
Thank you, Stephen. It's great to break away from hoeing the back 40 on my lot here, in North Carolina. So thank you. Good to be here. So that's why I got my farmer's tans, So
yeah. Well, the first thing I wanted to hear from you, you have obviously a very extensive military background. You've been into battle, live fire. You've been a spy. Very well trained operations that have kept the United States of America safe. From all of that experience, how is the Ukraine counteroffensive going from a military standpoint? And secondly, why would Zelenskyy have announced step by step what they were going to do, how they were delayed, no ammunition? It makes no sense why they were so open with the media about what they were going to try to do to Russia.
Well, that's the mystery. And yeah, it's like Eisenhower planning the D-Day invasion for France, announcing to the Germans, by the way, on this date, be aware we're going to put the P-51s into this sector over Caen. So just watch out. And then, 5 days later, we're going to put the artillery into Normandy. So be ready for that. And then the other parallel to World War II to D-Day is like, it's like trying to invade Normandy by sending in the airborne troops 5 days ahead of the ground troops, and then having the M1 Sherman show up 2 weeks later. It's like no, you had to have it all wired, prepared, ready to be completely focused and effectively led at one time. That didn't happen here either. So there's a lot of mysteries about why it was so badly managed. So the closest, so let's talk about the Zelenskyy thing for a second. Zelenskyy, I think, is acting politically. His interest is trying to find funding and support from the West. I think that's why he was so vocal about it. Hey, we're not doing well, we need help. And it's like, yeah, admitting that it's kind of giving your enemy a head up too. It's like, if this is true, let's take advantage of it. And apparently it was pretty much true. And the Russians were cautious but effective in using it. And Stephen, to that point, the Russians allowed all of this immense combat power that we in the West have furnished Zelenskyy to be used completely uselessly. It's like, yeah, just throw it in there, see what happens. And the other part of this regarding Zelenskyy is he is not a good leader. And I know I'm going to get in trouble saying it, but he's not. He's not permitted common sense and real military strategy to prevail in how they're approaching the Russians. And let me give you an easy explanation of why I say that. So there's two generals running this war: Zelenskyy, who's basically the commander of all forces in Ukraine, and Syrskyi, who's a colonel general who technically outranks Zelenskyy. So what has happened is that Zelenskyy has been laser focused, and you hear him in every interview talking about, we're going to retake Crimea. Yeah, it's not going to happen, but that's his focus. That's his white whale. So that's been his focus, and then and all the forces that he's overseeing has gone to that. Then the other guy's gone to Zaporizhia. I always pronounce that badly, but Syrskyi's been focused on the north. So when you're literally, as a military force, Stephen, outnumbered 7-1, Russians roughly and your only hope is to create tactical advantage by focusing effectively military forces at key locations. So maybe you can get 10-7. You can bring all your forces together at key points and do penetrations. It's not going to happen when you allow two generals who basically see the war completely differently to go out and do this. This is like Eisenhower and Montgomery during World War II. It's like, yeah, we're just going to let Montgomery go do his thing because he's such a cool general. And it wouldn't have worked. And it's not worked here. So all the different precepts of military strategy that one would expect. I'm only a freaking, colonel. What the hell do I know? I mean, But I see this for what it is. I talk to folks about this. One of my dear friends, Brigadier General Blaine Holt, General Holt, and I talk about this all the time. It's like, who's advising these people? And I think it's Mark Milley. And if it's Mark Milley, Mark, if you're listening, shame on you, because you should know better from any number of war colleges and other courses you've been to over the years to permit this to happen. If this is the advice, you're allowing that. So I think that's why you've seen an overwhelming just repudiation by the Russians of the Ukrainian offensive. It's just not going to work. The numbers aren't there, and the strategy is not there, and the political will. Whining as a strategy, as Zelenskyy has done, it's not a good one. So
yeah. Do you think that he has a single point of contact for NATO and NATO assistance, or do you think there's confusion by being advised by a dozen different countries with different strategies and ideas?
I'm not in a room with them, so I don't know, but I will say, based on observations and comments, I think Victoria Nuland has volunteered herself to be the single point of contact between she and him. She's actually commented publicly. You can Google this and get her videos, how she's quote unquote advised the Ukrainians on how to conduct their offensive. A little hint: you don't want State Department people advising you how to do military operations. Just saying, Stephen. I mean, I've been around a day or two, and that was not a good idea if that's the case. And remember, she's married to Kagan, who runs something called the Institute of Study of War. So I think she thinks she's half as smart as she thinks she is regarding military strategy. Just saying. Okay. And I think that's where a lot of this is coming from, is from this obtuse and reckless attitude of Victoria Nuland to advise them to do Zelenskyy to do things which have been inimical to victory on their behalf. So I think that's what's going on. Do the Ukrainian military leaders have contacts in NATO? I'm sure they do. Does Zelenskyy talk to Milley? I'm sure they do. I'm sure they talk a couple times a week based on Milley's own comments. But again, measures of performance versus measure of effectiveness. Let's talk about that for a second. So, Stephen, one of the things I've taught at a number of classes at the Army Asymmetric Warfare group when they were in existence in the Army War College, one of the things I teach is the distinction between military operations, intelligence operations, measures of effectiveness versus measures of performance, MOP versus MOE. So say, for example, you're an officer in the military. You have to be evaluated based on the guidance you're given, objectives, tools, techniques, technology, whatever you have, and how well do you accomplish those goals. So you can establish a performance standard, measures of performance. Now that performance could result in good or bad things. It doesn't really matter. You've just taken standards and you perform to that standard. That's why we have generals who have never won a war, who have serially failed, still get promoted because they didn't care if they actually achieved anything. It was just, oh, I met the standard and I moved on. That's the problem with our military. We need to return to measures of effectiveness, MOE. There's something called effects-based operations. A few years ago, I was a big promoter of. A guy named Jim Mattis killed it. So I could go down a whole rabbit hole on that. And Marines don't do well unless they're handling crayons, and no crayons were involved in MOE. Just saying. So I know I'm going to get in trouble with that too. Anyway, so but measures of effectiveness should be the standard which we judge activities, operations, entities, or individuals, and we don't. We set up an completely artificial, no regard to will it work or not, standard thing sets. Like, hey, did you polish your boots? Yes, I did. Did you drink water twice a day? Yes, I did. But did you win the war? Well, that's not on my list, so I don't care. You know, did people die? Well, it's not on the list. I don't care. So this is what happens, Stephen, when you have a detachment from reality, which allows you to be successful based on artificial standards, but has no reality, no basis to, did you do your job and were you effective? So this is the same issue that I've seen our military leaders, especially the senior ones, to include Milley, I throw Milley into this, who are more than happy to give advice. And, well, these are the things that should have worked. Yeah, but they didn't work. Why didn't you change your advice? And this is why we have a system right now which is catastrophically flawed, that is on the brink of failure if we have to actually do something with it to win a war. So
yeah. Thank you for that. Do you? I don't know if you saw this or not. Two things this last week. Admiral Kirby of the Pentagon
yeah,
said, we're sending in the F-16s. It's not going to get there for several months, but we don't expect them to turn the tides of the war.
no,
On the heels of that, General Mark Milley said, these jets aren't going to do much because it's going to take a couple of years
exactly.
before we have trained pilots, trained ground crew, enough equipment, mechanics, an area to take off and land. Did Biden announce these offerings of F-16 fighter jets without really knowing what is entailed with operating them?
I know Jake Sullivan's been told what's entailed. I know that John Kirby knows because John's been at the Pentagon. By the way, did you hear the rumor that John Kirby is starting transition? He's changing his name to Joan. Did you hear that? I think it's only appropriate that they go through and live there. That's a joke, by the way, Stephen. I'm only joking about it. But it's a good joke. I mean, could you imagine Joan Kirby wearing a skirt and everything? Just saying. So, if you're going to go woke, go all the way, John. Just saying, if you're going to do it anyway. Back to the topic of F-16s. John Kirby knows. So this is the issue that I see. The Ukrainians came out of the. I've said this on your show. The Ukrainians are cut out of the same cloth as the Soviets. They all were the Soviet Union. So you go back to being Russians and Ukrainians, you still are kind of, you're still the same bolt of cloth. Because of that, when the Soviet Union fell apart, the Warsaw Pact fell apart, Ukraine ended up with a ton of military equipment from Russia. The Russians, they built stuff. Russians had plants in Ukraine. So the idea now is that you're going to introduce, and they already have introduced some weapons, some Western weapons. We've got leopards, chieftains. We've got all this gear kind of trickling in. But what they're not talking about is the challenges regarding sustainment, logistics, repair, all these things that come from Western equipment is completely different than BTRs, BTMs, and Russian T-72s, T-64s, T-90s. It's all different. There's no compatibility, Stephen. You've got to literally start from scratch. So if you're having that kind of problem right now with just basic ground equipment and weapon systems and missiles, you've got to do the same thing, only an order of magnitude more challenging for aircraft. Again, you have the MiGs and the Soyuz, the SU series, Sukhoi. Those are the aircraft that the Ukrainians are used to flying. That's what they fly. That's what they do. So the moment you start converting that to U.S. systems, you have huge problems. You have to retrain, and this is everything. This is not only the pilots. This is the guy who actually has to fill the tires with air. Geez, that little thing that you put the air in is probably a different diameter than the one you're used to for this. So that means you'd have to have a different tool. Everything is different. You've got to convert everything over. That takes time. Then you got to convert the people into understanding how to use the converted equipment. That takes time. Then you got to figure out a system that manages this stuff, which is different because the logistics are different, the technology, the time it takes, the spares, it's all different. And then you get into the actual aircraft and flying. Everything is laid out differently in the F-16 versus the MiGs or the SUs. So the idea that you're just going to pop a couple of guys into training in Mississippi or the Netherlands and get them all trained up and throw them into combat is science fiction. It's dangerous thinking that will net you nothing, and they're being just the barest degree necessary, honest about this. Like, yeah, it's going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of investment. In many cases, Stephen, I've talked to people. Look again, Blaine Holt, General Holt. our military U.S. Air Force aviator, has talked about the fact that they would rather, the U.S. Air Force would rather have young kids who have never flown Russian-made equipment, so they don't have to take to basically get them out of the bad habits they're going to have by trying to go back to their original training. I don't know if you've flown. Do you fly, Stephen, at all? Or
no.
So I used to fly helicopters with the Army, and you do things so repetitively, it becomes instinct. You can do it without thinking. And so that's good and bad, because in a high stress situation, when you go into the black, when you have to react, you just kind of know what to do and you get through it. When you're in stress and you're in combat and you're not adequately or effectively trained on the new equipment, you go back to what you knew in the old stuff. There's a thing. Remember the Hawaiian 737 that lost its top. Remember, a few years ago there was a Hawaiian error, and like the first section of the 737 fell off, and the plane survived and flew for a while. I recommend you go check it out. Anyway, during that event, one of the pilots was a former Navy pilot, and during the event, instead of being able to focus on what was going on, he actually started doing this. He started doing this, and it's like nobody knew why he was doing that. And then, when they got through and they landed and they got back, and it's like, hey, there was this really strange. The co-pilot said, "There's really strange things you were trying to do this." He says, "Oh, that's how we're taught to punch out of our F-14s." So I'm just telling you, you revert back to your most basic training in high stress situations. So if you're flying a 737, you're not going to punch out by doing that. But my point is to illustrate how such training is going to be necessary to overcome the habits and techniques that they were trained to do on their MiG aircraft. It's just, I would say, even if you get them trained, Stephen, I don't give them much. To Millie's point, I don't think it's going to be a game changer. As a matter of fact, I think it's going to cause more headaches and potential downside than any advantage at this point. And yes, Joe Biden, if maybe Joe Biden doesn't know, but I know his staff knows everything I've just explained to you.
Yeah. I mean, the best I can relate to is when my wife and I went to St. Thomas, an American Virgin Island, and they have American cars that they drive with British rules. And so, like, you're on the left side of the car, but you're driving on the left side of the road. So the right-hand turn is really hard, and you have to think. And then now, you're driving.
Yes, there you go.
Very, very confusing. So
and
I can imagine being chased with machine guns and rockets,
missiles,
and trying to remember all of that. So I get it. Let's switch gears for a second with flying things. I think you're my only guest that knows the stress and the pressure of being a whistleblower on Capitol Hill. We've had two major hearings. One from IRS people talking about the Biden family LLCs, all the money being rerouted from Ukraine and China and other parts of the world. You also have the whistleblowers coming forward about UFOs, UAPs, alien technology that the United States has been hiding, allegedly, black operations, black budgets. Tell us a little bit about the pressure that these people might be under as a whistleblower, and then what are your thoughts on each of those?
So, on the whistleblower piece, just in general, just as a statement of how it is, I wasn't planning to be a whistleblower. I was sent by the U.S. Navy. I was attached as an Army guy to an organization called Deep Blue. Deep Blue was the internal think tank for the U.S. Navy. Worked for the Chief of Naval Operations. This is in 2004, and so we were tasked to reestablish able danger for the Navy. That is to say, everything able danger was. Then I don't want to get into it here. People can go figure it out. Navy wanted to bring it back for its own purposes, and so I was part of the original team. They put the original team back together and said, go figure it out. It's like, okay. So there came a time I had to go to Capitol Hill without authorization, official authorization. Navy sent me, and Army kind of knew I was there. And so I started talking to Kurt Weldon, member of Congress, Representative Weldon, to ask for money for, hey, we're going to put the band back together. And so Weldon made the mistake of asking me, well, what happened to the original band? what happened to the money we gave you? And that's how my the second protected disclosure was made. I didn't know I was just like, well, this is what happened. Had no idea. Now, from there on, it's like you're being asked really hard questions. And at least for my chain of command, the answer was, Stephen, the number 3 guy in Army intelligence said, tell them what they want to know and tell them the truth. Oh, okay, that's clear enough guidance. I was, go do it. So these guys did not have a supportive chain of command. And so they had to go through all sorts of hoops just to get there. And it sounds to me like they were denied and cajoled and restricted all along. And it's very difficult because that Joe Biden is lying. And this is where it's got to be really grating on them. It's like you see Biden making these obtuse comments, completely false comments in public. Joe Biden saying all these things and, oh, Hunter's the smartest guy I know. And, oh, my son never did anything wrong. And it's a lie. So it's got to be driving these guys nuts. And so I kind of felt the same way about 9/11. It's like, yeah, there's a lot more to this, but, there must be a classified annex where the rest of the story is told. And I found out there's no classified annex in 9/11. It's like, holy cow. That means they deleted whole parts of history. And these guys probably felt the same thing. It's like, there's something really wrong here because we know the truth and what they're saying is not true. So you reach a point in your life, at least for me, it's like, I can't live with myself. I can't sleep unless I fulfill my oath of office. And I think both of these guys, Ziegler and the other guy, both Shipley and Ziegler, Shipley and Ziegler, really just got to the point where we got to go tell the truth. And by the way, they're not, one's a Democrat, one's a Republican. People tend to forget, Stephen, I blew the whistle against a George Bush 43 White House to include against my old friend Don Rumsfeld. Don and I became friends after the fact because Don figured out he was lied to, but at the time, he and I were going at each other publicly. So I'm just saying that you choose because your oath and the very fiber of your being tells you to do it. You don't benefit from it. You lose whatever career you think you had, you lose. And these guys, while they're still technically aged, their career is over. It's just done. And I think they're going to find it out the hard way. They're going to put you in a box or in a library. It's like, yeah, go be a senior agent in a library. Just sit there. They're going to make their life miserable. It's inevitable, but you do it for the right reasons. So I think those guys recognized the importance of what they had to say outweighed their personal comfort, and God bless them for doing that. And that's what happened. So they did. On regarding the merits of the information, 17 million is lowballing what happened. And to me, it's apparent, has been apparent for a long time that the Bidens are a criminal syndicate, that they were shaking people down for money, for influence. Joe Biden he is the big guy as far as I'm concerned. I think there's ample evidence of that. And yeah, I'm glad that at the time we're taping this, the plea deal fell apart. I think it's ample, the idea that there's still investigations, but we're gonna basically, Judge, we're just gonna allow him to be, no, we're gonna give him immunity for that. It's like, I don't think so. And I'm glad she spoke up and said, I've never seen this before. Can you explain this to me? So to me on the UFO stuff. So let me hold on. Yeah.
Really quick. I never cut my guests off. It's one reason people like my interviews. But are you before we go on to the UFO stuff, are you allowed to share what Donald Rumsfeld was lied to about?
Yeah. You want me to tell you that? Sure.
Yeah. I'm very curious.
So let me tell you the story.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So let's talk about Don Rumsfeld for a second. Don and I had he's in Darkheart. If you read Darkheart, my first encounter with him was at right after 9/11. I'll just leave it to you guys to read and figure it out. Anyway, Rummy and I had a cordial relationship after we cleared the air, but Rumsfeld and I were sitting in the green room at Fox News. I think it was 2012 on the 9/11 anniversary. And, I've never worked for Fox, by the way. I was often on there. I have a lot of friends over there. So I was sitting in the green room at Fox News. And literally, we're sitting across from each other in the green room in the DC bureau. And so as we're talking to each other, we're sitting there going through just niceties, just being pleasant to each other. Clearly, there was tension. And I said, Mr. Secretary, there's something between us. And he looked at me and says, yeah, Able Danger. And I was like, holy cow. Okay. He remembered. And he looked at me, and people who know Rumsfeld know how he does this. He kind of looks at it and he says, yeah, Tony, why is that? And I said, because you were lied to. I said, let me tell you, Mr. Secretary, everything I had to say was based on my personal experience. I wasn't out to burn the place down. I was out to try to illustrate the fact that we had a black operation that was focused on killing Al-Qaeda before 9/11. And I simply was asked to tell the truth. And whatever they told you about my intentions and what I was doing, you were lied to. And he looked at me, he says, I don't doubt you. And Tony, that wasn't the only thing they lied to me about. And so that's all we had time to do. And then he said, I was told to go, and he said, go break a leg. Oh, no, what did he say? He said, don't screw it up. Don't screw it up. So he had a great sense of humor. So, and then after that, he actually made favorable comments about me in the media, to include at an event in New York where he was being honored. So Don, and I was trying to get Don to come around, and I think Don was about to have his McNamara moment right before he passed. I really think that he was on a journey of self-discovery and recognizing that all he thought he was supporting was not necessarily so. And I think that, I'd like to believe the Able Danger issue, when I explained to him my end, and we spent some more time talking beyond just that event. Yeah. We spent some more time going through things, and he was someone I regularly interacted with. He's not as close to me as Ed Meese or Bud McFarland, but we did have a cordial relationship. So that was how I think Don Rumsfeld did come around on some of the issues and recognize that some of us trying to be whistleblowers weren't enemies. We were simply trying to do what we thought was best based on what we had observed. So
yeah. Now remind me, was he Secretary of State, or what was his position?
Defense, Secretary of Defense.
Okay, Secretary of Defense. So just
twice,
just so my audience remembers, he's the guy that said we can't account for $2 trillion in the military budget, and 9/11 happened the next day. And that's magically, right, all the files that were necessary were burned up. Right.
So so basically, one of the financial area of the Pentagon, to include DIAs, Defense Intelligence Agencies, was hit and burned. Chuck Sabin, you're going to find this ironic. So Colonel retired Chuck Sabin, Air Force guy, was a DIA finance guy. Now I was running off the books operations, and so I had my own financing coming in from other sources. I don't want to get into it, but it worked. And I, by the way, I had to answer to Congress every year. It wasn't like I could just do whatever I wanted. I actually had an IG team doing 100% audit every year. So everything I did was accounted for. With that said, the DI, Defense Intelligence Agency bureaucrats, didn't like the fact that I could do my own thing. I didn't have to go to them for permission. So Chuck Sabin went about, he was one of the guys working for a guy named Louis Prombé. Louis was hated the fact that I was given dispensation. Next to Louis Prombé, I had the highest signature authority in DIA. I could just sign off on things because I was running a company, my own company, off the books. So Chuck Sabin was tasked by Louis to undermine me, to stop me from doing something called Able Danger. You've probably heard of it. So the fact that they were trying to work to stop my work in Able Danger, to stop our effort to go after 9/11, it's really ironic that Chuck Sabin himself died in the 9/11 attack. So I've always found it ironic that the very man who was tasked to stop my operation was killed by the very terrorists who we were tasked to stop. A bit of irony there, I'd say. So, yeah. But yes, my point is that the larger issue, all those financial records were destroyed because that part of the Pentagon was hit in the 9/11 attacks. So,
wow. Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to get you off on a tangent.
No, but I always like telling a story about, kind of karma. Yeah. Karma kind of comes back sometimes and gets you. So,
Yeah. Well, okay. So on to the UFO whistleblowers.
Yeah. So This is a book. I don't get any money off this, by the way. The Day After Roswell by Colonel Philip Corso. Colonel Corso's long passed. So Corso claims in the book that he observed the alien bodies and technology right after 9/11. I'll just leave it at that. So I gave this book years ago to one of my colleagues when I was running my Special Mission Task Force Stratocyber. You know, we were a black off the books operation, and I was assigned a very senior Defense Intelligence Agency civilian, GS-15. He'd been around forever. He was like Yoda. And so I took a copy of this book. I said, "Hey, could you read this book and tell me how accurate it is?" And so he takes it, reads it. He comes back to me about 2 weeks later, and he says, "I said, so what? How accurate is it?" He said, 80% accurate. 80% accurate. Well, that means the central premise that aliens crashed and we had the technology is true. And he just kind of smiled at me. So, and since then, I've come to find that there's credible evidence that the technology that was obtained from these things was dispersed. And so bureaucracies are a funny thing. Never attribute to evil that which bureaucracies do naturally, which is basically lose things and accumulate power for themselves. So I think much of what the mystery is about this is not so much the U.S. government keeping it secret. It's the U.S. government being what it always is, incompetent. So do they keep it a secret? Yeah. Do I believe that people have died over this like they were implying yesterday? Oh, absolutely. I think the X-Files are far more real. Some of the little clues they put in the X-Files, you know, Fox Mulder and all that, was far more real than people recognize. And I think there's going to be an unveiling. And I've seen all this stuff in social media. Oh, they're just trying to distract us from Hunter Biden. It's like, no, I wish it was like that. Yeah. But I think there's much more that has been recorded, obtained, and retained by the U.S. government and other governments as well. And this is a good, I think, introduction to good primer into the issues. So, okay. And by the way, Army has never publicly commented on this book.
Really?
Just saying. Yes.
Wow. Okay. I mean, one of the testimonies was, I think, from a pilot or maybe two, where they say that off the coast of the United States, they regularly see these like squares wrapped in a transparent bubble, and they can move in any direction. There's no energy coming off of them. And he said the thing that is strangest is that they can stay out there for hours. Meanwhile, as a pilot, he has to go fly or has to go land and refuel, and they come back and they're still out there. It's just a tremendous amount of energy to keep something flying for these long periods of time. So it's been interesting to see this information drip out. But again, like other people, my first thought is, are they pulling out the UFO story to cover for Biden or to cover for something else that's going on? But it does seem that there is some truth woven into this narrative. And it's one of the things that I would love to get to the bottom of.
I think we will. I think it's coming out now. I've been, I've observed UFOs when I was a kid in the Philippines. A cloudy day when I was, I think, 9 years old. I observed something moving. It was this size. This thing was three times the size of the Hindenburg. It was like a black dot connected with a black pole to another black dot connected to another black dot. This thing was huge, filled the sky, and moved silently over the mountains near Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. And I'm sitting there like watching this thing. It's like, it was like incredible. And I still remember it like it was yesterday. And so, yeah, I've seen things that was no U.S. Air Force aircraft. My dad was a maintenance officer for F-4s. We had nothing like that in 1969. So wow. I know so I'm just saying that if I've seen that, I'm sure others have seen stuff. And I think, I think we've captured things that we can't figure out. That's what that book is about. I was just mentioning. So I think it's a very interesting thing. And I think a lot of people would be freaked out. I think that's why they've been so reluctant to talk about this, is it may fundamentally change the way certain religions see the universe. I don't see any incompatibility personally, but that's just me.
So. Yeah, it doesn't bother me a bit. Okay. Speaking of major distractions and UFOs, this was a major breaking story in the last 24 hours. As you know, Hunter Biden has all these people anonymously buying his bubble artwork,
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
and they remain anonymous. Well, one of the names was leaked. It's a woman from California that has bought multiple paintings, and Breitbart News was able to go in and look at the White House records. They couldn't find who had the cocaine in the White House, but they discovered that this woman, since anonymously buying Hunter's paintings, has been invited to the White House 13 times. Is this just another piece in the pattern of pay to play, bribery, or I buy influence in these underground methods to get access to Joseph Robinette Biden?
Stephen, I can't believe you're questioning someone who is, she apparently her job is to tailor Depends undergarments. And I think she's tailoring special made ones for Joe Biden. So how can you question such an amazing woman who's giving so much of her time to help Biden stop pinching? So the answer is, of course, it's what it appears to be. It's pay to play. It is exactly what it appears to be. So, and I don't know if you watched Karine Jean-Luc Picard, whatever her name is, talk about this yesterday. About they ask her directly, "Hey, this woman's ball of this art, what's up?" Oh, I get a check on that. What do you mean you got a check on that? I mean, it's obvious what's going on. And yeah, I mean, and by the way, Karine guaranteed that there'll be no pay to play. The Hunter Biden art is completely blind. There's not going to be any connection. Of course, there's connection. So I don't know how anybody I don't know how anybody is shocked. As a matter of fact, I would be more shocked, as other people should be shocked, if they told the truth, because everything that they talk about regarding denying wrongdoing, it's like they were doing it. So I think it was completely apparent. But who wouldn't want Hunter Biden's art on their wall? Come on, Stephen. I mean, who wouldn't want that?
Well, and I'm guessing Karine Jean-Pierre just happened to not be there the 13 times that this lady came to the White House after anonymously buying art from a brand new artist.
Anonymously, yes. They had no idea she bought all this art, but somehow she shows up. It's a coincidence, of course.
Yeah, shows up at the White House. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I appreciate you coming on. I like to get the serious stuff out of the way first, because there's people dying, and yet people are curious. They want to understand the war. They want to try to understand the mind of Vladimir Putin. On the other hand, we have like the most idiotic stuff happening in the White House. And I just want, to make a little bit light of it, because it really is kind of a serious thing that, until people on the Hill pull their heads out and do something about it, we all just have to go, it's so obvious. This has to be collusion and cover up. It's crazy.
It is. And again, Stephen, I appreciate the time to have the conversation. I always enjoy our conversations because you let me kind of tell war stories, which are always fun. Yeah. And I hope it's entertaining and educational for your audience, because, I mean, and don't get me wrong, I say a lot of kind of wise ass things, but there are good people in the government trying to do the right thing. The whistleblowers are good examples of that. I'd like to believe I was a good steward of the resources and operations I had to run. My interest was just to do something, to be effective in achieving objectives. And every day, good people show up to work in the government to do those things, but they are a minority. And to your point, we have huge flaws. I'll be polite, regarding how they approach the budget, the economy, acquisition, the war. Everything is being looked at, being handled politically, not professionally. And once you start putting professional politicians instead of professional technicians or experts in, you see the results we're observing right now, and it's very sad. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again. If people want to tune into your radio show, how do they do that?
So we're on the America Out Loud Talk Radio Network, Saturdays and Sundays at 11. It's online. People can check us out. And then obviously we post stuff. We've been together on the show. We post stuff on londoncenter.org and Project Sentinel, projectsentinel.com are our two websites, the two think tanks I run. The content is shared between those organizations. So again, Stephen, I sincerely enjoy our conversation. So thanks for having me today.
Great. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.